Good morning, everyone. Today's driving question is, how does the body fight against infectious diseases? Just a reminder about the expectations that you should have an exercise book or a sheet of paper. You should write your date and your driving questions. All headings should be underlined. And no distractions that include mobile phones or tablets not in use, so that you can get the best from this video. Right. This is a remember slide. It assesses previous knowledge. We're going to read the instructions together. Fill in the blank for each of the following word equations. You have the photosynthesis reaction, aerobic respiration reaction, and anaerobic respiration reaction. I'd like you to write the word equations out. Also fill in the blanks. I'm not going to ask you to pause the recording. Right, photosynthesis equation. It's carbon dioxide from the air plus water from the soil. Those two are going to react together to produce oxygen and glucose. So carbon dioxide and water are the reactants, and oxygen and glucose are the products. Oxygen and glucose is needed for aerobic respiration, which is happening in our cells at a cellular level. And that aerobic respiration is going to produce water vapor, carbon dioxide, and energy. Remember that aerobic respiration means respiration that involves oxygen. Lastly, anaerobic respiration only involves glucose, does not involve oxygen, and it causes the buildup of lactic acid in our muscle cells, causing fatigue, plus energy is also produced. Right, this is our retrieval practice, and it is going to assess previous learning. I'm going to ask you to answer this question without looking back at your notes. It's to assess what's in the long-term memory. So list the 4 types of pathogens. Just a reminder that pathogens are microorganisms that causes infectious diseases. That is linked to our driving question. How does the body fight against infectious diseases? So now you can pause the recording and answer this question in your exercise books. Right. Viruses, bacteria, protists, and fungi. These are your 4 types of pathogen that can cause infectious diseases. The goal of today's lesson is to explain the type of pathogen that's causing a disease. Is the disease caused by a bacteria? Is it caused by a virus? Is it caused by a fungus? Is it caused by a protist? How is it spread? How is the pathogen spread? What symptoms are the individuals going to feel, or what symptoms are going to be evident by others? And what control measures can we put in place? What precautions can we put in place to reduce the spread of these infectious diseases? And your key term for today is communicable diseases. Right. Pathogens are microorganisms that cause infectious diseases or communicable diseases. What a communicable disease is a disease that can spread from one person or one individual to another individual. And just a reminder that pathogens do not only affect animals, they also affect plants. How are pathogens spread? Yes, that's correct. Direct contact with people. Stay away. Self-isolate. Contaminated water. Sneezing, talking, it can be spread by droplets. That's why it's important to be covering your mouth with a handkerchief if you're going to be sneezing. Okay? Pathogens can also be spread by mosquitoes, which are vectors. We're going to be getting more into this in depth throughout the lesson. The spread of infectious diseases can be reduced by, that's correct, washing your hands using the 6 steps of the hand washing techniques, as you can see here. Self-isolating from infected people. Okay? If you self-isolate, you're going to reduce the spread of that infection to others by killing those mosquitoes using insecticides or manually. And lastly, by vaccinations, which is going to help to build immunity. So, I'm going to ask you to draw this table in your exercise book or on your sheet of paper. I will be showing you visual aids throughout this lesson. That's going to provide hints for you to fill in your table. So I'm going to ask you to write the disease, the type of pathogen that's causing the disease, how it's spread, how the pathogen is spread, symptoms, what the individual might feel or what can be seen by others, and how we can control the spread of the pathogen to reduce infectious diseases from one person to another. At this point, I'm going to ask you to pause the recording. Right. First disease is measles. Measles is caused by a virus. Okay, we're looking at viral diseases. How is measles spread? By talking, by coughing, from the tiny droplets of the infected individual. Okay, this is why it's very important to be using your handkerchiefs when you're sneezing or when you're coughing. Also, symptoms of measles. What can be seen is a symptom. What the individual can feel is a symptom. Symptoms of measles is a red rash on the skin, as you can see. Other symptoms of measles also include a high temperature or a fever. How we can control measles is by getting a vaccination. What vaccinations do is that they introduce an inactive form of a pathogen. So it's inactive, it's dead. And even though it's dead in the body, the white blood cells detect that there is a pathogen or a foreign substance in the body, and the white blood cells automatically start to produce antibodies that's specific to the measles virus. So in the case if a real infection were to occur, the body will fight more quicker, or they will produce antibodies more quicker to fight the measles virus. And that's what immunity is, the ability for the immune system to produce these antibodies at a quicker rate, and therefore they're more effective. So vaccinations help to build immunity. So by now, you should have your measles virus, your measles as your disease, the type of pathogen being virus. It's spread by tiny droplets through coughing or sneezing or talking. The symptoms, red rash on skin, and to control it, we can use vaccination. So at this point, if you need to pause the recording to check your answers, please feel free to do so. Right. The next viral disease that we'll be looking at is HIV, which is an STD, sexually transmitted disease. And HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. As mentioned before, HIV can be spread through the exchange of bodily fluids and through sexual contact. It is an STD. It also can be spread, the HIV virus can also be spread using needles of shared needles. This is why needles should not be shared. If needles are shared, then the virus can be transmitted from one person to another. Symptoms for HIV include flu-like symptoms. So when we say flu-like symptoms, we mean a runny nose or some form of a fever or high temperature. How we can reduce the spread of this HIV virus is by antiviral drugs. And what antiviral drugs do is stop the virus, the HIV virus, from entering the lymph nodes. Now, the lymph nodes are very important, as discussed in the previous lesson in immunity, because they act as filters to trap bacteria and viruses. HIV is can be very detrimental because over time, if the virus enters the lymph nodes, it can now attack the body's immune cells or the body's T cells, killer T cells. And if the body's immune cells are being affected by this HIV virus, then it will eventually weaken the immune system. So over time, this HIV can lead to AIDS, which is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, which happens over time. Most people that die of AIDS it's not caused by the HIV virus that's really that's killing the individuals. It's the effects of having a weak immune system and the body's inability to fight common infections, for example, pneumonia. So because the immune systems become so weak over time, our immune system will lack the ability to fight common infections like a flu or pneumonia or TB. Okay, so this is quite important, and also it's important that you know that because it's an STD, barrier contraceptive methods should also be used at all times to prevent the spread of infections through sexual contact. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video to recheck your answers for the HIV to ensure that all your answers are correct. Okay, and we will be moving on now. So a virus called RSV is caused by a respiratory disease. So suggest 2 precautions that a person with RSV could take to reduce the spread of the virus to other people. So what 2 precautions can be taken to prevent the spread of a virus from one person to another? And that is an examination question worth 2 marks. I'm going to ask you to pause the video and try to attempt this question. Right. So anyone will give you the 2 marks. You could have said regular hand washing, 1 mark. Using hand sanitizer, 1 mark. Cover your nose, mouth when you're coughing or sneezing. Wear a face mask. Put tissues in the bin. Don't kiss uninfected people. Allow isolate patient from others. Okay, don't share your cutlery, your cups. Okay, or drinks with if you're with uninfected people. You can clean, disinfect, sterilize surfaces. So any 2 of the following points would have given you 2 marks. Right? Let's continue. Now we'll be looking at bacterial diseases. So the first bacterial disease we'll be looking at is salmonella. And the salmonella is caused by is spread by contaminated meat. For example, chicken, very popular. If chicken is contaminated, you can be infected with salmonella, which is a bacterial disease. And the symptoms for salmonella is vomiting or diarrhea. And to control the spread of salmonella in the UK, chickens are vaccinated to prevent the spread of this bacterial disease. And it's also important that good hygiene is important. For example, hand washing. Okay, so hand washing after handling meat and ensuring that meat is prepared in clean conditions. So by now, your salmonella should be in your disease column. It's caused by bacteria. It's spread by contaminated meat. The symptoms is diarrhea and vomiting, and it can be controlled by hand washing, having good hygiene, and also by vaccinating chickens. Right, another bacterial disease we'll be looking at is tuberculosis, also known as TB. Over time, mucus builds up in the lungs, causing difficulty in breathing. Okay, and it's caused by bacteria. Okay, tuberculosis can be spread by coughing and talking. It's spread by droplets. So again, it's very important that when we're sneezing or coughing, that we're using a handkerchief to prevent those droplets from being spread from one person to another. The symptoms that an individual might feel um, if they are diagnosed with tuberculosis is a high temperature or fever. Okay, another symptom that the individual can feel or that is evident by others is a persistent cough. And what we mean by a persistent cough is that it is ongoing. Okay, and tuberculosis can be treated with antibiotics, and it is very important that you know that antibiotics can only treat bacterial infections. And recently, some antibiotics are failing to treat some type of bacterial infections. For example, the antibiotic penicillin used to be treated for gonorrhea. So people with gonorrhea, which is a STD, used to take antibiotics to kill the bacteria that's causing the gonorrhea. But because of new strains of the diseases, the antibiotic have become resistant, or the pathogen has become resistant to the antibiotic. So when we mean that the pathogen has become resistant, it means that the pathogen can no longer be killed by the antibiotic. And how we can control resistant pathogens or antibiotic resistant, we can control that by taking our full courses of antibiotic. If doctors don't overprescribe drugs, and if we control the agricultural uses of antibiotics. And again, you can also control tuberculosis or TB by vaccination, as discussed before, to build immunity. In fact, babies get TB. Babies get TB when they at the early stages when they're first born, and TB is given based on the area that the child is living in or the country, because obviously certain areas have a higher rate of TB than others. So you can pause the video to check your answers for your tuberculosis. Okay, if you should have the disease of tuberculosis is caused by bacteria. It's spread by tiny droplets, for example, talking, coughing. Symptoms is a persistent cough or fever, and the control is antibiotics and vaccination. And just remember that antibiotics can only treat bacterial diseases or infections. Right. So, a bit of a challenge. A child has a sore throat. The mother takes the child to the doctor. The doctor says that the child has a bacterial infection. Explain how the infection makes the child ill. So, this is quite tricky. What does bacteria produce based on the last lesson? What does pathogens produce? What does bacteria produce? So, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and try to attempt this question. Okay, it's a 2-mark question. So, therefore, 2 bullet points are essential for this answer. Right. Bacteria reproduce rapidly by a type of asexual cell division or reproduction known as binary fission. So they reproduce so fast that they can make clones very rapidly. They also produce poisons and toxins that we've discussed in our previous lessons. And those toxins are the reasons why we feel those symptoms. Okay? So you need to write any 2 of the following to obtain 2 marks. Right, we're going to be looking at the protist disease. Okay, malaria. So malaria is the disease. Okay, it's caused by a protist. You need to know that the symptoms of malaria is high temperature or fever. don't know why that's happened. Okay, as we can see here, we have an individual that has a high temperature, or what we say a fever. So that's one of the symptoms of malaria. Malaria can be controlled by having mosquito nets, especially in third world countries or tropical countries where there's a lot of rainfall and and high temperatures. We can also kill the mosquitoes by using some form of insecticide or manually. So what happens is that the mosquitoes are vectors for malaria. So the mosquitoes are not causing the malaria. This is very tricky. Malaria is caused by a protist. So the protist is a pathogen that causes malaria. So why do we say that mosquitoes are vectors for malaria? Mosquitoes spread malaria. They don't cause it, they spread it. So the pathogen that causes malaria is protist, but mosquitoes are spread. Okay, mosquitoes spread the disease. Okay, so because they are spreading it rather than causing it themselves, they're known as vectors. So that's also another keyword. So what happens is that a female mosquito is going to bite the individual for a blood meal. Obviously, she's pregnant, and the pathogen is going to travel in the bloodstream to the liver here, and as you can see, the pathogen is going to the protist will divide, okay, and eventually spread to the red blood cells, causing the destruction of red blood cells. That's why the person is going to start having a fever or high temperature, okay. And then if another, what happens is another mosquito will, have another bite of an individual to create a blood meal, the female mosquito, and then the protist will mature in the mosquito gut, and then the mosquito will now bite another individual to obtain another blood meal, and the cycle repeats. So it's a parasitic infection spread mostly by Plasmodium, and that's the Anopheles female mosquitoes that's doing the biting because they're pregnant. And why is malaria more common in tropical countries or countries with lots of rainfall? Is because mosquitoes actually lay their eggs on water. They lay their eggs on water, and those eggs will now develop into larva, a pupa, and then eventually into an adult mosquito. So if you have a lot of rainfall, then potentially it means that you'll have more places that the mosquitoes can lay their eggs on top of water. They breed on the waters. So more rainfall, more places for mosquitoes to breed and lay their eggs. And also high temperatures increase the rate at which the mosquito matures. So temperature is a factor that can increase the rate that the mosquito matures. And obviously, if you have more mosquitoes, you're going to have more malaria. But there's also an optimum temperature. Obviously, if the temperatures are too hot or above or below the optimum, then it will be highly unlikely for the mosquito to thrive. Okay, so yes, they in tropical countries, for example, countries like Guyana, where it's more close to the equator, you will experience higher levels of infected people with malaria than here in the UK, where the climate is much cooler. So again, you can make sure that you check your answers, that you have the disease being malaria, the type of pathogen being the protist. It's spread by mosquitoes, in particular female mosquitoes. The symptoms are fever or high temperature, and we can control malaria by having mosquitoes nets or killing them with insecticides or manually. With that being said, I'm going to ask you to match each disease to the correct description. Okay? I'm going to ask you to pause the video to do this. Right? So you should have had HIV can increase the chance of other infections like pneumonia, because HIV can enter the lymph nodes and also affect the immune cells, the killer T cells. Malaria is part of the life cycle that includes an insect, as we discussed. Salmonella can be spread by not washing your hands thoroughly. Just to go over the expectations again, that you have a Google form quiz to complete on this entire lesson. I'm going to ask you to eliminate any form of distraction, for example, your mobile phones or iPads that's not in use. Please feel free to go back to the recordings if you get stuck. And this is the end of this lesson, and stay safe.